My daughter-in-law once looked me in the eye and said, "We just want you somewhere safe, Mom." It took me far too long to realize what she really meant. Somewhere she could get into my accounts without me noticing. She said it across a birthday dinner table, soft-voiced, eyes full of what looked like concern, while a gift bag sat at my place setting. Inside was a glossy brochure for Willow Creek Senior Living. My son had highlighted the memory support wing in yellow. That was my birthday present. That's how this story starts. It is not how it ends. My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm 70 years old. I taught high school chemistry for 34 years, and I raised 2 children who apparently believe that the day a woman turns 70, her brain turns to fog and her bank account becomes a family resource to be managed. I want to say something plainly before anything else. I was not confused. I was not forgetful. In fact, that very morning, I'd just come from a meeting with my financial advisor. Together, we'd reviewed a portfolio worth just over $2.1 million, money my late husband Harold and I built slowly, patiently, without shortcuts, over 4 decades. And the truth is, none of my children knew what it was really worth, because I never believed there was any reason to advertise it. My son Bradley is 44. He runs a mid-size logistics company that had, as I would later learn, quietly lost nearly $400,000 over 18 months on a warehouse expansion that never found tenants. My daughter-in-law, Cheryl, works part-time, and in 12 years, she had never once asked me a question about my life that wasn't a lead-in to a question about my finances. My daughter, Wendy, lived closer. She called more often, and I loved her for that, right up until I understood what those calls were really for. For about a year before that birthday, the conversations had started to change. Not all at once, just enough for me to notice, without wanting to name it. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing? Mom, you really shouldn't be driving at night anymore. Mom, Bradley found this wonderful community. It's very upscale. You'd have your own little apartment." Every conversation arrived wrapped in warmth, so much warmth that it took me far too long to notice the pattern underneath. They weren't checking on me. They were building a file. The brochure was the moment the file was finally handed to me, wrapped in a bow, at a restaurant with my own grandchildren sitting at the table. Bradley slid the gift bag across the table toward me. Before I could say a word, Cheryl looked me in the eye and smiled. "We just want you somewhere safe, Mom. Somewhere with support. You don't have to do everything alone anymore." Bradley nodded beside her. Then Wendy quietly added, "We all just want what's best for you." The 3 of them looked at me as though this were compassion. It wasn't. It was the opening move. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Thank you for thinking of me." Then I folded the brochure, placed it back into the gift bag, and finished my dinner. Most people would expect a 70-year-old woman surrounded by her own children to feel small in a moment like that. I didn't. I felt something else entirely. I felt very, very awake. 2 weeks later, the real betrayal arrived, and it was far worse than a brochure. While I was recovering from a minor hip procedure, Cheryl offered to help tidy my home office. She later claimed she'd found an old folder of financial statements completely by accident. 3 days later, my banker called. His voice was apologetic, uneasy. He asked whether I'd authorized someone named Bradley Voss to request informational access to my accounts using a power of attorney he'd brought into the bank. I hadn't. I had never signed a power of attorney. Not for Bradley, not for anyone. That was the moment everything changed. My own son had drafted paperwork with my name on a signature line I had never touched. He was betting that a 70-year-old widow, recovering from surgery, wouldn't check her own mail carefully enough to notice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, calculated, and somehow that made it even more devastating. I called my attorney, a sharp, patient woman named Denise Okafor. She had handled Harold's estate and mine for 15 years. I asked her to do 3 things. First, pull a full forensic accounting of every activity on my accounts over the past year. Second, prepare ironclad proof that I was fully competent, a complete cognitive evaluation from my longtime physician, notarized, dated, beyond dispute. And third, quietly begin drafting an entirely new will and trust, one that reflected exactly what I now understood about my children's priorities. What the forensic review uncovered took my breath away, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed everything I had begun to fear. Bradley had tried, twice, to initiate wire transfers using the forged power of attorney. Both attempts were blocked by my bank's fraud department. That is the only reason I still have every dollar of my $2.1 million estate. Cheryl had been photographing financial documents inside my home office. On at least 2 occasions, the housekeeper's security camera caught her in the frame, and Wendy, sweet, attentive Wendy, the daughter who called every Sunday, had been the one who first suggested Willow Creek. She had toured the facility herself, learned that many residents handed financial decision-making to a family point of contact. She found the loophole. Then she handed it to her brother like a gift. I want to be honest about what I felt reading that report. It wasn't sadness, not at first. It was clarity, cold, uncomfortable. Absolute clarity. The same feeling I used to get grading a chemistry exam and realizing a student hadn't simply made a mistake. They had copied the answer key almost word for word. That strange mixture of disappointment and the quiet certainty that I would not be fooled. I didn't confront them, not immediately. I let 6 weeks pass. I attended 2 more Sunday dinners. I smiled. I listened. I let Wendy gently ask me whether I'd given more thought to Willow Creek. I smiled and told her I was considering it. What none of them knew was that every single day of those 6 weeks, Denise Okafor's office was quietly preparing the document that would end this conversation forever. If stories about family betrayal, quiet justice, and impossible choices are the reason you're here, I'd love to have you subscribe. We've got a lot more stories like this to uncover. The reveal happened at my next birthday, my 71st, because I planned it that way. Same restaurant, same private room, only this time I brought the gift bag. I placed it in the middle of the table before anyone had even ordered a drink. Bradley opened it first, laughing, expecting a joke. Inside wasn't a joke. It was a bound copy of my new estate plan, notarized, executed, fully legally binding. Alongside it was a letter from Denise Okafor's law firm, addressed to all 3 of my children. I watched Bradley's face change line by line as he read. Everything, my $2.1 million estate, the house, the savings, every asset, was now protected inside an irrevocable trust. Bradley and Cheryl were excluded from every direct and indirect distribution. If either of them challenged it in court, they would lose everything. Denise had made certain the no contest clause was airtight, especially after the documented forgery attempt already sitting with the district attorney's financial crimes unit. Wendy wasn't excluded completely. I'm still her mother, and I still believed some things could be repaired, but her inheritance had been reduced to a modest, fixed amount. Everything else that would have gone to her was redirected into a scholarship fund for chemistry students at the high school where I taught for more than 30 years, mostly girls. Girls who reminded me of the woman I used to be before anyone decided my competence had an expiration date. Cheryl spoke first. This is all a misunderstanding, I let her finish, because I wanted everyone at that table to hear the whole excuse before I answered it. The bank has the forged power of attorney. The fraud department already has it. I'm not confused, Bradley. I never was. I was patient. Those are two very different things, and you spent an entire year mistaking one for the other. Bradley didn't apologize, not at first. He chose anger. He said, I was punishing him for trying to help. He blamed Cheryl. He blamed me. I let him finish too. Then I said, the only sentence I'd rehearsed. You gave me a memory care brochure for my birthday. My memory works just fine. It's your signature forging that's going to be remembered. In the end, the district attorney's office chose not to pursue criminal charges against Bradley. The wire transfers had been stopped before any money actually left my accounts. And after talking it through with my attorney, I realized a courtroom wasn't the ending I wanted. The trust was permanent, irreversible, every consequence written down, signed, protected. That was the justice I could live with. Cheryl faced consequences of her own. The accounting firm where she worked didn't renew her contract. The fraud referral had surfaced during a background review, connected to an unrelated licensing matter. I won't pretend I enjoyed watching it happen, but I won't pretend I was sorry either. 8 months later, Wendy called me. She was crying. She asked if there was any way back. I told her the door wasn't closed, just narrower than it used to be. Because trust, like anything real, isn't rebuilt with one apology. It's rebuilt one honest year at a time. Since then, she's started coming on Sundays again, not to talk about Willow Creek, not to ask about my finances, just to spend time with her mother. I still live in my own house. I drive myself to the grocery store on Tuesdays and to my garden club on Thursdays. Every spring, I write a check to that scholarship fund. And I think about some 17-year-old girl standing in a chemistry lab who has no idea her education is being paid for by an old woman who refused to be quietly filed away. If there's one lesson this story taught me, it's the same lesson. I spent years teaching from behind a classroom chalkboard. Never assume the reaction is instant just because the trigger has already been added. Some of us take our time. Some of us stay quiet on purpose. And some of us, when we finally respond, do it in writing, notarized, and permanently binding. If this story stayed with you, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Tell me what generation you're watching from, and if anyone has ever tried to write you off before your time, how did you answer them? If stories about family, betrayal, justice, and the choices that change everything are the reason you're here, I'd love to have you subscribe. There are many more stories still waiting to be told. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next story.